Hello, everybody!
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we are taking on yet another competition, another call to action from our great friends over at Fantology Podcasts. They have started another monthly competition, and this time they have challenged us to submit 3 of our favorite mothers in fantasy to enter this bracket tournament where fans will vote on their favorite submissions, and we'll see how it goes. But in the meanwhile, we're just thankful for the content idea, I guess what I should say.
Yeah, we're always appreciative when Fantology runs one of these polls over at Fantology_books on Twitter. If you want to follow this event, then that is the best place to go about doing that. And yeah, we did one for favorite Magic systems, and that was a blast to talk about. I feel like I learned a lot about our tastes for Magic systems, more than I knew going in.
Yeah.
And and that was a fun competition too. And then we had they did favorite sidekicks, and we'd already done an episode on that, so we didn't get the opportunity to record a whole new sidekicks episode. But this time they have something that we haven't done yet on FTF, which is favorite mothers, to honor the month in which Mother's Day falls, May over here.
That's right. And Steven, if you are listening, it would be helpful if you just looked at our back catalog for next month and make sure we haven't done... I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, we are super appreciative to be working with Fantology, and that they invited us to submit entries. And, I was just listening to their episode that just came out where they were talking about their submissions for their favorite mothers in fantasy, and it was really awesome. And they actually gave us a shout out, which was really touching. And they started this new segment where they feature a specific creator, and they chose us for their first one, which, we're very honored for that. We love Fantology. They'll always have a soft place in our hearts because they were our first collaborators. They were the first ones that were like, hey, you want to record together? And we'll always be super appreciative for that. And we've got some exciting stuff cooking up with them in the very near future for all you Abercrombie fans out there. So it's going to be very exciting.
Is that a tease?
That's a tease.
For me too, huh?
We talked about it. It's just been a while, but around the age of the Wisdom of Crowds release, we want to do some kind of fun stuff building up to that. So, we love the guys over at Fantology, and we appreciate the shout out. And right back at you, Fantology_books. Go check them out if you like what you're hearing here. You're gonna love what you're gonna hear over there. So,
well said, Charles. Yes, and their love over to the crew over at Fantology. All right, and one way in which we show our love is by chatting about our favorite mothers that we submitted to Fantology's competition on Twitter. We're going to keep this super high level and hopefully accessible, so there are not going to be any real spoilers in this conversation. We're just going to chat real broad perspective. What do we love about these 3 fantastic portrayals of mothers in fantasy fiction?
That's right. Keeping it spoiler free. So let's get right into it with our first pick. You know, we wouldn't be talking about characters on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast if we weren't talking about Game of Thrones.
Yeah. So the first one was the first character that came to mind for me as soon as I was hearing that this competition was going to be about best mothers, and it's Catelyn Stark from A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. And Charles, this is just an iconic mother in fantasy, right? Doesn't get more iconic than the mother of the Stark family, the
matriarch. Yes, exactly.
The matri Stark.
Yeah.
Ooh.
The matri Stark.
There's a part of I could have. There's a part of me that wants to ask you to edit that out, Charles, but no, I gotta stay real on here. It's staying in. I don't do that. I don't. We just fly here. So, so yes, Catelyn Stark is just an incredible mother in so many ways. I think that she's the character of these three that is most dedicated. I don't know if that's probably not fair to say, but I guess the portrayal is most focused on the aspect of being a mother beyond any other aspect of their life, of the three characters that we chose, if that makes sense. Like, Catelyn's role in A Song of Ice and Fire is very defined by the fact that she is the matriarch of the Stark family, and she has a ton of kids to look out for. Her previous family, or I don't know if that's a way to phrase it, the family of her origin, the Tullys, have their words, as they like to say, or like a saying for that family is family, duty, honor. And Catelyn really lives up to the fact that family is first in those Tully words. She is absolutely fierce in her role as a mother, and she draws, I think, from some of that Stark wolfishness and how much she's protective of her children.
Right.
And something that I really appreciate about Catelyn, so her relationship with Robb, the oldest son, is extremely central, extremely loving, and she's always looking out for him. He's still a teenager, I believe, in the books, if I'm correct there, Charles.
They're all pretty young at the start.
Yeah. So, and I think that's part of why Catelyn's role in the story is so much about being a mother, because she has still children. Some of these, at least one of these other characters, the one we'll get to last, I think, her children are adults, so it's kind of more defining out her role outside of motherhood. But Catelyn is still in the thick of things with all of these kids, and she's so protective and great and loyal and awesome at balancing her roles with Robb. But something that's interesting and something I like is her complexity in her relationship with Jon Snow, who's the bastard in the family. Yeah, so you take it from here then, Charles. Talk some about Catelyn.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into spoilers, but right at the beginning of this story, the family dynamic is very at the beginning of this, where all of the children, not all of the children are Catelyn's, and one of them is Jon Snow. Jon Snow is like the bastard son of Ned Stark, and she's creating a home for Jon. She accepts Jon as a member of the family, but there's always this piece of their relationship that Catelyn kind of resents. So there is this balance between she's doing her best to raise this child and welcoming this child into her home, but it's also just a constant reminder of Ned Stark's only betrayal, right? It basically is how she sees it, and the fact that he looks kind of different than the other kids always kind of got at her as well. So it's interesting to see that relationship play out, and it's a complicated mix of family. Another thing that I really enjoy about is it Caitlin or Catelyn? I keep interchanging the two. Catelyn, thank you.
It's Catelyn.
So one of the things that when I think of in terms of motherhood about Catelyn's character is a lot of times there's like this in literature, there's this wisdom that comes with like a mother character, and Catelyn definitely seems to embody that. She definitely seems to have a lot of guidance and advice, and although she's not like the Ned Stark, her husband, is like the lord of the of Winterhold, but she's very Winterfell. Oh my goodness, it's been a while since I've cracked open these books. Winterfell. Thank you. I've actually been there. Okay, I went to Northern Ireland and I've seen it, so I've been there. You'd think I'd remember it. So Winterfell, and she's very much like lending her advice and her wisdom, and you listen to it and you're like, that's very reasonable, like that's, you're like, she's bringing a lot of great counsel in the best role that she can in this society where it's very patriarchal. So not necessarily, but at least in Winterfell,
I would say it is a patriarchal society.
Yeah. So there's a lot of strong female characters, but it is still a patriarchal society. That's kind of where I'm getting at. So in her role,
I think that's accurate.
Yeah, and she, there is this duty, like we said, and there's this family, and she really embodies both. And the way that parallels with Ned Stark and the kids is what makes her story really compelling.
Right. I think it'd be so easy, and we've seen a lot of the mother characters in fantasy that just embody only, I guess, these kind of stereotypical nurturing mother characteristics that honestly, like, it doesn't make them feel like full people. And if that's the only thing that they do, it's like they have no actual depth or well-roundedness to them, and Catelyn has so many sides to her. Of course, she has that nurturing side to her, and she shows that very frequently in the series, but she also has this ferocity. She has this thing lingering with Jon where she isn't able to give the same level of that to him as the bastard in the family that she is giving to her children who are biological. And it just feels like the kind of things that a real person might struggle with. And that's one of the most amazing things about the characters in Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire is that they all feel so real and complex. And I think even among that incredible cast of characters, Catelyn has always stuck out to me.
Right. There's so many like literary pitfalls that Catelyn could have easily fallen into. Yes. Like, imagine if, say, an author like Robert Jordan were to write Catelyn and she'd be like crossing her arms, being like, harumph, Ned, how could you go off and do that without counseling me? You wool-headed man. And then she'd be like, oh, you've got some dirt behind your ears. Let me make you a pie, and then you'll do whatever I say. But it's not like that. She knows how to she's very strong and independent, and she's her own personality, and she doesn't fall on these motherhood tropes at all. She just happens to be a very committed mother while also recognizing the danger of like high stakes politics, right? The Game of Thrones. Yeah. So she's balancing both of those things, and she's got a lot of children. Her husband is in a very high position of power, so she is always working to keep the family going with warts and all. And it's really fascinating to read these characters that George crafts, and Catelyn is unique in that because she does balance the line of duty and family so well, and that's just why I think she's a great submission for this contest.
Well said, Charles. I feel good about our Catelyn discussion. Yeah, she's great stuff. I think she's a character that lots of folks know about from reading those books or watching that show, and there's so much more I'd love to get into about Catelyn if we could do spoilers and stuff, but let's keep it rolling and chat about our next mother, who's one that, our next mother is one that you've been one of my favorite characters as well, but one that you've really been championing and bringing
Thank
into
you.
things whenever we get the chance. And yeah, I'll let you go.
Yeah, well, thank you, because this
introducing
is not the
next one,
first
Charles.
time we've spotlighted this character. In like our second or third episode of all time, almost a year ago
Yeah.
now, we did our first ever like favorite fantasy characters, just hard stop. And this character made it on the list. And now that we're revisiting this idea of like not just favorite character of all time, we're talking about favorite mothers. And this character is from a graphic novel series, so it's unusual in that sense. And this is a graphic novel series that we've been championing for a long time, but have yet to read on the show. I think
Yes.
we're just waiting for that next volume to come out. And it's of course Saga. And of course we're talking about the matriarch of Saga and one of the main characters in that whole series, which is Alana. And Alana to me is, when you're talking about the idea of motherhood, is so fascinating because she's not your typical mother. She's almost like a 180 from Catelyn. I mean, yes, she loves her child unconditionally, and everything she does is bound by protecting her family. That's what this whole story is about, a family just trying to exist in a war-torn galaxy that doesn't want them to exist, and their whole goal in life is to just live a normal life. And they're just not normal people. And watching that portrayal of motherhood is so fascinating because she's almost like she's got these like punk rocker vibes. And, you know, she didn't set out to have a family. It just kind of happened. And then she really grew into the role. And watching her go from this like individual, almost like burnout character to a very strong matriarchal character is amazing. And it's one of the best like works of fiction I've ever read, and one of the best characterizations in graphic novels ever. It's just so fresh and funny and like gut-wrenching, and at the same time, and the way that these characters develop over time, Brian K. Vaughan, the author, is not afraid to like fundamentally change the settings and the plots and the looks of these characters like a lot of other graphic novels would be hesitant to do. And watching the characters go through that much growth and development, it is just really exciting. And I'm looking forward to reading more Alana, as I know there's murmurings that they're working on it again. There's no date announcements or anything like that, but it seems like they're getting ready to start the process again. And I'm just super thrilled. I mean, Alana as a mom was my obvious first choice for this contest.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that, Charles. She is just such a phenomenal depiction. I like what you said about how she's a 180 from Catelyn in a lot of ways, although they both bring that ferocity and how they try to protect their family. Catelyn comes from, like you said, this patriarchal society where she was basically brought up to be a mother beyond anything else, right? And in the world of Game of Thrones in Westeros, that's what happens for someone in Catelyn's position. And it's her number one identity, I would say. And for Alana, it might be her number one identity, but I don't know. She has so many other things going on for her that she's trying to balance and trying to live her own life and get her own needs met and trying to rise to an occasion that she was not trained or prepared for in any sense of that word. It kind of just and to, you know, from a spoiler perspective, the first page of Saga as a comic is her giving birth. So I wouldn't, just in case folks are worried about Alana becoming a mother being some sort of spoiler, it is something that's thrust upon her in a kind of in a way where I think, like a lot of folks in our current society, they're not trained or prepared to be parents. It just, even if they want to be, it just kind of ends up happening, and then they try to figure it out along the way. And Alana, you say they're not normal people in terms of the place in the world her and Marco hold, but in a lot of ways they're also ridiculously normal people, as we and you, Charles, have talked about before, just unbelievably relatable, besides the wings, besides Alana's
the wings and the horns,
Marco's horns, they're both extremely relatable in the ways that we watch Alana just deal with things like trying to get a job, trying to manage like trying to manage,
meet the in-laws, and
meet the in-laws, manage her relationship with Marco, and try to make all of this work in a galaxy that they are way out of their element in trying to deal with, where they suddenly end up in, because another thing that's there from the beginning is this piece of when those two have a children have a child as star-crossed lovers, they end up in the center of this galactic war where two people from those separate species are not supposed to be having a kid. So Alana's trying to manage this situation that she's completely just not prepared for, and not just motherhood, but their place in the universe. And she does it all in such an interesting and weirdly relatable way for a space opera.
No, it's so true. And what makes me so happy about our submissions is this. Like, I feel like we cover a great spectrum of motherhood between Catelyn and Alana, because it's not really a 180, because they do both have this strong relationship with their children, but their personalities are just totally different from each other. They couldn't be any more different. Alana was always kind of like I think they describe her as almost like kind of like this burnout and, kind of a troublemaker and things like that. That's how like her coworkers would describe her. Like, oh, she's kind of annoying, not really that good at her job. I don't really think about her that much. Like, that's what everyone kind of says about her. Yet she, is having these really honest, amazing relationships with with Marco, I guess her husband, and then her child, and all the zany characters they meet along the way. And it's a fun journey watching them grow and adjust to these roles. And they, like I said, Brian K. Vaughan, it's a long series. They go through a lot of different challenges and ups and downs and growth and setbacks and all these kinds of things. And it's such a meaningful story because at the end of it, it's so relatable, like you said, Dylan, it's just a family getting through what a drama a lot of families experience, especially a lot of young families that are challenged just like with having their first kid and still trying to capture that romance they used to have, or maybe like just trying to find just a place to live, and like we just want to be a happy family together, but there's so many outside forces getting in our way. It's such a relatable challenge that I don't know, these characters pop off the page to me, and it's a side of motherhood that I think is not to say missed in a lot of classic fantasy, but it certainly stands out against a lot of classic fantasy moms. This is a very progressive society in which these books take place. So there's a lot of new, interesting relationship dynamics. That's something modeled after like a feudal medieval society like Game of Thrones wouldn't have too often. But it's interesting to compare the two. And I'll leave it at that without getting into spoiler territory. But I highly recommend Saga to anyone that hasn't read it. And Alana's one of the highlights of that whole series.
Yeah. And not the only interesting mother character in that.
No, not at all.
In that comic series. I won't talk too much more about that. So, yes, I am super pumped whenever we get the chance to talk about Alana.
It's going to be big. It's going to be so much fun.
Yes. And another character that I am really excited to talk about is Navani Kholin from the Stormlight Archive. So that's by an author you probably have heard of named Brandon, #1 New York Times bestselling author, Brandon Sanderson, and an author that we always love talking about on FTF here. One of our favorites. Stormlight is a series that, Charles, you haven't had the chance to read yet. So
I have
I'll
not read
probably-
Stormlight, so I'm going to be a little light in this conversation.
Yes.
I'll react where I can, but I don't know who this character is at all, so I'm here for the ride.
Yes, and I will be pitching Stormlight Archive in
You're going to be pitching
this upcoming friend.
Stormlight and Scott Lynch. I knew you would do that. I knew it. I asked you not to, but I don't blame you at all at the same time.
Yeah, I've been
It's
pretty
evil, but-
vocal. Evil's strong, but I think they're both.
You do realize I have a
series
community
timely read.
online that wants me to read Lies of Locke Lamora. Meanwhile, Stormlight is like the hottest fantasy series like being published right now. So it's like, okay. Anyway, not to derail this conversation, we're talking about Stormlight. I'm dying to read Stormlight. It's probably the biggest gap in my reading, my fantasy library.
Lies of Locke Lamora.
Yeah, I mean, it's up for contention between the two, honestly. So I'm excited to hear. This is a character I haven't really heard a lot of murmurings about, so I'm excited to listen in.
Yeah, so Navani's an interesting character in a lot of ways, and part of what she has going for her that these other couple characters that we talked about do not is that both of her kids are adults at the point of the story starting. And I feel like we don't get a ton of, I could be completely off here, but I don't have a ton of like mother characters that come to my mind that are in this place of being an empty nester, basically.
Yeah.
And right? Like,
Yeah, it's
but there's
interesting.
so many people, right? There's so many people who are empty nesters as this whole stage of life. And I think more media depictions of that could be interesting because I just think it's something that doesn't get depicted as frequently as might be helpful and just might be intriguing. So anyway, yeah, so both of her kids and both her kids are kind of in a place of yeah, I mean, this is a spoiler to say that they're like a family of royalty. Navani starts the story as by the I'm trying to think of talking about something that happens in a prologue is a spoiler, but I just won't talk
I mean,
about
I've heard
it. I
the
won't talk
prologue's
about it, but-
pretty long.
There's a prelude and then a prologue, I think. So, yeah. But, okay, I won't talk about it because it's not entirely necessary. They're in a position of royalty to some degree, this family. And her kids are adults that have to figure out their own ways of managing their positions of power. And Navani is in this place of just trying to carve out her own life while still, she's involved to whatever extent she thinks makes sense with her kids, but they're living their lives and she's got to live her own. And she has her own passions and her own interests. She's like super interested in engineering. But yeah, the whole time you can tell that she still cares for her children and her family. She just has to understand that it's different when you're an adult and so are your kids. And Navani, she's someone who's extremely capable at handling political situations. And she, although in the past she was in a place where being more involved in that made more sense than it does at the time of the start of the story. And she's a character that has all of these abilities to maneuver and all of that political subtlety that you'd expect from someone who has a history of dealing with those machinations, while at the same time it's balanced by this interesting synthesis in Navani of being very logical, but also being in touch with her feelings and her wants and her needs and the ways in which she wants to make her life into what it can be, even though she's already gone through this whole, I've been a mother, I've raised my kids to adulthood. She's not done. She's
Right.
ready to take on all these new things that are going to bring her life meaning. And she takes a lot of action to try to make that happen. And in a series with, I was kind of saying it's about Catelyn and A Song of Ice and Fire, but these are two series that we're talking about with giant cast of characters, A Song of Ice and Fire and Stormlight Archive. And even in the Stormlight Archive, which so many characters, such a wide world, Navani sticks out as a particularly interesting character, a particularly multifaceted character, and a character that's just different from, in a different stage of life, and therefore in the deft writerly hands of Brandon Sanderson, a very intriguing portrayal of a person in a stage of life we don't see as often as I'd like to see depicted.
Yeah, we've almost like covered the gambit. It seems like at the start of each of these stories, Alana is giving birth on page 1, and then you have Catelyn, who has kids in their younger years, and then you have this Stormlight character who is an empty nester. We're like covering the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
Look at us.
I didn't even think about I didn't even think about that when this always happens, right, Charles? Where we talk through all of it and then we realize some sort of theme or something. Yeah. That's kind of fun. We got a nice variety of portrayals.
No, I am very happy with our submissions. And even though I haven't read Stormlight Archive, the fact that there is a strong mother character in Storm, I'm like, yes, put that in, because I know I can rely on Stormlight to be like a popular choice and a favorited choice. So Sanderson's name recognition to me alone is enough to give it an endorsement. And Dylan's endorsement, of course, as well, it was a big part of it. So I had no problems bringing that one into the show. And yeah, I think what a lot of, what I like that Sanderson is doing is he's bringing in a lot of new takes on these fantasy tropes, and it's this idea of like an empty nester mother character trying to like figure out what she wants to do, it sounds like, or finding her, still continuing to pursue her own identity. It's interesting. I love that, and I think it's yet another reason for me to pick up Stormlight already.
As if you needed more of those.
I know.
Yeah. No, it's awesome, and I mean it's not a huge. I didn't have to push particularly hard to get a character Charles hasn't read, like he was saying, on this list when it's coming from Brandon Sanderson. We know you have a lot of faith in Sanderson's work, and the phrase magnum opus gets tossed around a lot about Stormlight Archive. I think that it's got the best characters of any, in my opinion, in my own taste. I like, that one almost got away from me, Charles. Yes. For my own taste, I think that Brandon Sanderson's characters in Stormlight Archive are his crowning achievement of character writing, except maybe I really loved Spensa in Skyward as well. But just for writing a ton of ridiculously great characters, right. I mean, we're not even scratching the surface, but Navani is so awesome. And like you said, Sanderson taking a different approach and trying out. So, I mean, when you have this many characters, you're going to have characters at all sorts of stages of life, but it's led to an incredible character in Navani, and I'm excited. I haven't read Rhythm of War yet, the 4th book, so I'm excited to see where things go for the whole series. And
okay,
but all in due time, Charles.
We'll get there. Exactly right. All in due time, indeed. And I think we have some time for a few honorable mentions, just really quickly, because there's so. Like, we're gonna title this our favorite mothers in fantasy, which is true. Like, these are like the first ones that came to my mind. I think they're a great balance. I think they're a great representation of different kinds of stories about motherhood and different characters that have their own things going on. And so I was happy with our submission, but there's so many others, and I'm just like looking at the bracket right now, and there's a lot of great choices here. We're not the only ones that put in Alana, which I'm happy to see. I mean,
That's
for me,
awesome.
I could have filled this all with Game of Thrones characters. Honestly, like my mind went to so many. I was like, which Game of Thrones character
Yeah,
are we gonna put in? I think for me, Cersei would have been my second choice to put on this list. And
it's
I see
interesting.
Dylan grimacing. What would your second choice have been for Game of Thrones mother?
Daenerys, Mother of Dragons.
Well, yeah, that's an
Does it
interesting
count?
one. Well, and we've actually talked about
Did
her.
anyone pick that in the? Did anyone pick?
I think so. Let me see. Yes, there is a
I have
Daenerys
an
mention.
honorable mention I want to talk about
Yeah,
just briefly.
let's hear it. There's a couple of Daenerys actually. She's pretty cool.
So Essun, who's from the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, is just a freaking incredible depiction of
That's
a
another
mother.
series I would
Yeah, and
love to read. Broken Earth.
yeah. N.K. Jemisin, she comes from that counseling background and she writes incredible characters. And Essun is certainly one of them. And right at the start, she's going through this really traumatic period in her life. And the way that it does involve her role as a mother. I won't say more than that, but this is like chapter 1 stuff, I think. And she, just the way that Jemison writes a character struggling with some of the awful things that can happen to someone in the role of mother is so awesome. I saw people picking Essun after we already submitted our choices, Charles,
Oh
and
yeah.
there was
You're
a
a kid.
part of me. I don't know who I would have. Yeah, I don't know for sure who I would have nixed, but I was like, oh, Essun, such an incredible character. But another one, Charles, you haven't read yet, so we can't get into too much depth. But just an incredible
Right.
character. Please check out Broken Earth. It's or if you want. It
Right.
is an incredible series. Yeah.
No, that's well said. And yeah, I would love to read Broken Earth trilogy. That was one you pitched in like way back, like the very first FPF. I think you
Yes.
dropped that one out there, and that was a tough one not to pick. That was like a really tough call, but
It's so good.
it keeps popping up in recommendation series, in shelves in the bookstores. It's always got a presence, and it's always in the front of my mind. I'm like, that is one I'm gonna get to soon. So I'm really,
Yes.
it doesn't surprise me at all that there's a character that would make the list, and I would have been happy to put that in. So yeah, that would have been a great choice. Let's see. I mean, one that got mentioned a lot was Molly Weasley from Harry Potter, and that was one that I threw
Yeah.
out for contention. I do think she's a great character, and she's obviously being a mother is a huge part of her character on that show. And there's some moments that happen with her, without getting into spoilers, where it's like a crowd cheering moment, and so I think that's why she is on this list for a lot of people. Another
is.
one that we almost put in, but then we were like, it's too deep of a cut, is Vitari from the first Law trilogy. Because what's interesting about her is it's just kind of like, oh yeah, and she has kids. It's kind of thrown in at the end. You're so caught up in her role in the first Law. She's one of the practicals, right? So, or is it a practical? That's what they're called,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
she's almost like a warrior. Basically, she's got throwing knives. She's on all these zany adventures, and then part of the plot is like, oh yeah, she has a family at home, and it was kind of it's just casually brought into the story, and you're like, oh, that's kind of an interesting take to bring into a motherhood discussion of a character who is a mother, but it's nothing to do with what their arc is in a story.
Right.
It's kind of an interesting take, and so that's why but we're like, it might be too deep of a cut, but we do like
Yeah.
to promote First Law whenever we can. So good for the honorable mention, I think.
Yeah. And even though it happens later in the series, I don't perceive it as something that is a big reveal, or it doesn't
No, it's
it helps
inconsequential.
you understand. Yeah. it helps you understand her better as a character, but it doesn't have these huge plot ramifications.
Zero.
It's well, there's a little bit, but
Yeah, but
I won't get into. But
yeah,
it's not.
yeah, I know what you're saying.
Not consequential. Not consequential. I think.
Right.
So, but I mean, that's part of the interesting thing. That's part of me trying to be like, I don't feel like it's a spoiler to say, but it's also me trying to say that it's a, like you were saying, Charles, an interesting thing to have it just be like, yeah, like this person was doing their job and living their life, but like, are you so shocked that that this character also happens to have a family? And
Right,
it's part of Abercrombie's incredible character writing. I think that he chose to do that because it's like, I think one of the things that Abercrombie does is he eschews the storytelling conventions of like every single thing has to have a plot purpose.
Right.
And it's like, well, no, like characters engage in behaviors that dictate the plot, and they engage in those behaviors because of things in their lives, but they might just have kids. And that, like they might be at work right now and they might just also have kids. And I think Vitari, you start to understand, oh, she did that maybe because she has kids, but maybe just because of other reasons too. And I won't get into for spoiler reasons. It's like, right. And that kind of, that Abercrombie gave her kids without needing to is just really interesting, I think, and goes to show how
that's well
he is
said.
at writing characters.
And that's why we were so tempted to put her in this list, because it's almost like, hey, here's an interesting take on motherhood and fantasy, where it's almost like a inconsequential, interesting, like, did you know she's also a mom? It's like, it's like not part of her identity, whereas people like Alana and Catelyn.
It is a part of her identity, but that's not the part of the story that Abercrombie is telling. That's not the role she has in the story he's telling. It's a big part of her life. But I think this kind of, I don't know, I think we see that all the time with fathers, where it's like, oh yeah, and they happen to have kids, but that's not what this story is about. And I think it's a fantastic job from Abercrombie to show, like, yeah, that can happen with mothers too. Like, it's just, So... love Shiloh Vitari, and obviously love Abercrombie's work.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to bring First Law into the conversation and get Vitari a shout out, which is not something we've done yet. So, I think we've done it. I think we've talked about a lot of moms in fantasy, and there's so many more out there, and it's such an interesting theme and part of characterization in fantasy storytelling, and I'm just it was just a really interesting conversation. And again, as we're wrapping up, thank you to Fantology for posing the question and putting us in this mindset. It was a lot of fun. It was a fun thought experiment, and I think these contests that they do are a really fun part of being in the community. So I appreciate all the work they do in moderating that and running it and putting all that time. And it seems like so much work to balance it all, but they do a fantastic job, and the community's better for it. So we're super thankful.
Yeah, totally agree, Charles. Well said. Thank you, Fantology. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing over there, and grateful for you guys.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for you, Dylan, and talking mothers with you, and we've had so much fun out here. And
a little bit forced that time, Charles, I felt, but I do think it comes from that heart of yours. I do think it comes from the heart.
It's true. It comes from the heart, and
I'm grateful for you too, Charles.
Like, where else can we talk about Vitari and her role as a mother? I have not had that conversation with another living soul, so I am appreciative of it.
That's fair. Neither am I. So, yes, always an awesome time being on this wonderful adventure of Friends Talking Fantasy with you, Charles.
Well said.
Super grateful for you as well. And you know what else I'm grateful for, Charles?
What, Dylan?
That we have such sweet, sweet outro music to get pumping right about now.
That we do. So I think we should just get into it. I don't know how you're feeling, but I think we should just get it going. Okay, great. Here we go. Okay, everybody, thank you for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to vote for us and help us advance in this Mother's Tournament, first you got to go to Fantology's Twitter profile, Fantology_books, right? That's their handle? Yep. Yes. And then you can look for Friends Talking Fantasy at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. Throw us a vote, throw us a follow, shoot us your comments, let us know what you think. We love talking over there. And we're on Instagram as well at the FTF Podcast. Now, yes. Dylan, if they went on to Fantology_books. They voted for FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end on Twitter, and they
or
still
vote for the other people if you think that their entries are better.
Yeah, vote for who you think is best. But think about the fact that we're friends now. You've listened to this whole episode. When you go to vote,
just go with your heart.
Go with your heart.
Go with your heart.
Yeah. There's no wrong answer for sure. But if they want to support the show even further, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
They can toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Click the Friends Talking Fantasy page. Charles is shaking his head at me now. Okay, click the Friends Talking Fantasy page. Yeah. And then you'll probably see some episodes. You want to scroll down past the episodes that you're seeing. Eventually you'll start seeing stars. They'll probably be blank. And then you would ideally click 5 of them if you want to support the show. If you had a little bit of extra time, then you can write a review, and that's extremely helpful for a podcast like ours. But just listening is more than enough. We really appreciate you doing that. Thank you so much.
Just listening, guys. That's all you had to do, and we're so appreciative for that. I mean, we're going to run out of outro music, and I'm not going to know what to do. So thank you all so much for listening. We greatly appreciate it. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.